Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Tennis Channel Inside In on the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. Special Labor Day edition with the 2023 U.S. Open entering the second week. Joined now by the resident journalist at our Tennis Channel Network. He's been on the show a few times. Tennis fans will know him from the author of Strokes of Genius. He's on 60 Minutes, Sports Illustrated. Midwest guy at heart, though, Jon Wertheim. Welcome back to the show.
I like the Midwest in the bio. I'm here for that. Good to be here. How are you?
Good. We mentioned before last time I brought up Breaking Away. I couldn't find any other movies filmed in Bloomington. I think Blue Chips was like Frankfurt, somewhere.
Good pull.
Yeah,
a couple counties away.
Yeah, they had the Indiana, team there.
Hoosiers too. Obviously.
Oh well, yeah, for sure. There's a lot of similarities with us, Ohio, Indiana, and we'll get to some of that stuff. But with the U.S. Open in full swing, thought it was a good time to talk to you. You're on TC Live for the entire 2 weeks of the tournament, the early morning show, getting everybody ready, and gearing up on what is a second week that's exceptional. The U.S. Open never does cease to amaze with the drama, because we can think we can plan stuff out and fill out our brackets, but I'd even argue that tennis, more so than even March Madness, you can't really go seed by seed. There's just more upsets than we can imagine.
There's probably a lesson in here for everyone. This is the first U.S. Open without Roger Federer or Serena Williams. Rafa Nadal is not here. Novak is, but he's been playing at night. So, think about it. The four dominant players of the last 20 years haven't been there during the day at the U.S. Open. And you'd never know it. There are upsets, there's storylines, there's controversy, there are more fans than ever. Sometimes I wish leaders in the sport would trust the product a little more.
Yeah.
Trust the sport, enough with the bells and whistles. Let the players and let their rackets do the speaking, and I think this is a good example of that.
Yeah, the fan thing's interesting, too. It's great support, obviously. Maybe too many people there at times, but it just shows you that the product is going to survive. There are going to be dips and ups and downs, and some of that is event-specific. We saw that when Serena lost in the semis or Roger and Novak lost that same day. Unfortunately, that stuff will happen, but the product is just on itself very, very well.
And I think fans like that they can come in and they don't know a whole lot necessarily about whoever pick your, Jelena Ostapenko.
Yeah.
By the end of 2 weeks, they know quite a bit. I think pet theory on the crowds. There are only 2 matches during the day on Ash. Mm-hmm. And I think that was meant so that in case there were long matches, sometimes you had this awkward situation where the night crowd was sort of parked outside the stadium and it was uncomfortable. So there are only 2 matches on Ash. What happens when those matches end or when they're quick or there's an injury? Mm-hmm. All those fans on Ash disperse around the grounds, or the matches get up early. Hey, it's 3:30 in the afternoon. Well, I don't want to leave yet. Yeah. So I think some of the short matches on Ash and some of the only 2 sessions, I think that might be one reason it does seem very crowded.
Yeah, you can never. That's the beauty about tennis, right? It's the only sport you really don't even know what time you're playing if you're the athlete in a lot of cases, unless you're first on. You have to, Medvedev touched on that, which we'll get to. But story so far going into today, especially, Iga Swiatek's out. She loses to Jelena Ostapenko. And, John, she lost going away in that third set, which was the most surprising thing. 0-4 against Ostapenko in her career, will lose the number 1 ranking. And that was a match that was not fluky at all. The better player won last night, and I don't know if it's a matchup issue or just the fact that maybe Iga is feeling a little bit of the pressure, but Ostapenko took it to her. She went big, and she absolutely deserved to win.
Yeah, Iga could retire tomorrow, and she's a shoe-in for the Hall of Fame, but it's been a strange couple months for her. And this is someone who got to number 1 in the world, and she's, wins. She's a defending champion here. She won at Roland Garros again, obviously, but there always does seem to be a slight, I don't want to say vulnerability, but sort of a delicacy to her. And you don't get the feel this is not a swaggering champion. This is not someone who's going to necessarily crawl on weeds when the going gets tough. And she lost that second set and then really vanished. So credit Ostapenko, who's sort of this chaos agent, and who, when she's on, she can be absolute dynamite. But, that is not the way a number 1 player and defending champion wants to sort of give up both.
Yeah, broke 7 times, which her serve was kind of a nightmare all night long. And Ostapenko, we know is the ultimate wild card. How she gets out of bed in the morning might dictate what's going to happen, and won't be afraid, which we saw. Yeah, I get the sense, too, with Egan. We know she's this Hall of Fame champion already, but she is so very process-oriented, my observation, that if something goes a little wrong, and I guess Rafa had this a little bit, but he still, developed and had that, ability to improv. With Iga, I do feel like if the process isn't perfect, you kind of see it. And a lot of times she's good enough to win, but she does get rattled more. And I think that's something she'll improve as she gets older, but we did see it.
Yeah, and I don't know what, and this is something it's not necessarily ingrained. I mean, I think this is variable, but I don't know what her taste for battle is. I mean, you mentioned Rafa or Djokovic post age 21 or so, where they love it. They have no problem being at 4-all in a decisive set. They have no problem playing a lousy set and testing themselves to reset. And I think Iga doesn't like talking about bagels and breadsticks, and I think maybe she finds it a little disrespectful to the opposition, but she much prefers everything's going my way. It's 58 minutes, and I'm whipping that forehand. I'm not sure how much she relishes fighting.
Yeah.
And that's something, and often she doesn't have to her credit, but when she does, I'm not, and Ostapenko sort of referenced this in her typically candid post-match remarks, but I get the sense that if you can sort of turn it into a fight with Iga, you give yourself a chance.
Yeah, it's a good point. Iga, I mean, maybe this is a lot of superstars in any sport. When your A game is so good that you can beat 98% of the population with it, your counterparts, when someone does kind of thwart that, you're not used to having to adapt. So for Iga, she's out. The draw does seem like it opens up. I mean, we can talk about Coco in a second, but you're going to have either Coco, Ostapenko, Kristeva, or Mukova in the final. So a little different than what we predicted, but that's been women's tennis, and it's been a pretty exciting thing for all these quality players.
Right. And I mean, I think everyone's, depending on where this will hopefully still be fresh. I mean, no, I think everyone's thinking this is Coco's turn now. And Iga had given her trouble for years. Coco seemed to solve the riddle in Cincinnati. I think a lot of people wanted to see if she could do it again on the big stage. She's not going to have to do it. So things are breaking very Coco, right? It's so funny, though. I mean, she left Wimbledon, and everybody was sort of really picking their words carefully, and the forehand was an open secret.
It was on every show. Every show,
I remember, and old former players are showing how to grip it, and should she take 6 months off and totally retool her forehand?
So, and it's an interesting point too, because I agree with you. It seems like it is Coco's tournament now with how it's opening up. There is pressure with that. She's much is made with the coaching that she has, Gilbert being on her team. I wanted to know, though, because in your opinion on this, there's a lot of people out there, tennis people, that say it really takes a couple months for a coach to make any kind of impact. And I wonder if this could be like a placebo effect type thing, or like a mental freshening up of just a different approach. Because the game has always been there, minus the forehand breaking down. I almost feel like there hasn't been too much technically different. She's just continuing to fight and win all these 3-set matches, which was kind of always in there.
Yeah, I mean, some of this might be sort of the myth of the hot hand and the myth of streaks, and maybe this is just things are regressing to the mean. I mean, you do wonder if you or I coached her, would these results be different? How much saying you need to make the match physical or keep fighting. I mean, I think we think of a coach as sort of having a calming relationship. I don't think at this level necessarily coaches are particularly technical. You're not telling Novak Djokovic how to change his grip at this point in the game.
Yeah.
But something's clearly working. And I think the other thing about it's a little tricky figuring out how much credit to give the player versus how much the coach. And I think, whether it's causation or correlation, and obviously the results since Brad Gilbert in particular has come on. I mean, the results speak for themselves. I also warn against getting too carried away with crediting the coach, because the player's the one that's got to go out there and ultimately deal.
Yeah, she's the one that actually went out there and won those tournaments. But I do think that, the pressure in the game is there. And I would argue, too, she hasn't even, I would say, come close to playing her best level for a full match. The first sets in a lot of these matches have been let down, which I take away as a positive. It's almost, we talked about Djokovic, Nadal in the past, these guys that ramp up for the big matches, and there's a lot there. But the pressure, I mean, she's a vet now, which is funny to say, but the opportunity is there. It's all right in front of her.
Yeah, I remember she lost the first set of this tournament that she played, and I think a lot of these matchups, too, are what do I really have to gain here, right? Mm-hmm. So she's playing little-known players or younger players, or the Siegemund, her first opponent, it's north of age 35. Caroline Wozniacki wasn't an active tennis player 90 days ago. So I think it's interesting to see how Coco's handling a series of very different, and Ostapenko's another totally different challenge than the others. So it's not just that she's winning two sets every match. It's that she's doing it under some strange context.
The Ostapenko match might be her toughest. I mean, it could be for the rest of the tournament. We'll see what happens there. Ostapenko's very game in a lot of ways. And before we move on to who's left, I wanted to touch on who you mentioned, Wozniacki, and this WTA moms resurgence and depth that we have now. You brought up something else on Twitter. It's that these moms are coming back more focused. It's kind of interesting to see with Svitolina and Wozniacki that they're adding stuff to their games and they're just maybe even locking in more than they did before.
Yeah, I mean, we could sort of joke about it. And, well, when you're chasing around kids, it changes your mentality. But I also think you take time off and you sort of say to yourself, what did I do well? What could I do better? If I were given a second chance, what would I do? And I think that that's the case as much as anything. And, I mean, the Svitolina is a great story. Taylor Townsend's a great story. It's not just the statistic when we say, oh, I think there were 10 moms in the main draw, but some of them really made a mark on this tournament. It's not just the sheer number of them, but I do think it's interesting that Svitolina and Wozniacki spring to mind as players who their 2.0 is different than what they looked like when they were top 10 players. Yeah,
my theory is just you have to be kind of all in when you come back. There's no 1 foot in, 1 foot out if you're going to make that commitment, and we'll see with the other moms that are coming back. The rest of the tournament, I mean, there's other players still in it. Jessie Pegula plays Madison Keys today, and it's an interesting match. We know how dangerous Keys can be, but for Pegula, it's one question. Can she get past that quarterfinal round? And it's there for again. It's been there, so we'll see. Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting too. She had a ground. If you heard that you know where I'm going with this. Yeah, what is it going to take? What do you have to do to get to a semi? And she says win a quarter. So she has a good sense of humor about it. No, I mean, I think with Pegula, I think she benefits. She's as we speak, she's still in the mixed and in women's doubles, so she's a week 2 player in 3 events. I think that probably helps with her scheduling, and I also think she probably benefits from this great ascent of Coco, and even to some extent the American men that it takes. She's the highest ranked American male or female, and yet she's probably number 3 on the storylines behind Coco and then this cluster of American men, and I think that probably suits her.
I think her ability to just withstand, as you said, the pressure of the ground. I mean, we'll see, because the Vondrousova match at Wimbledon was not her best performance. Australia this year, same. She's going to lose to some tough players. That will happen, but here's another opportunity for her. The last thing I have on the women's draw, John, is that you look at players that we thought maybe were flash in the pans, and Mukova and Vondrousova, they look like legit top 10 players now. This isn't a fluke what they did at previous majors this year.
Yeah, and I mean, Mukova's always just a sort of really fine athlete who just had a hard time staying healthy. She gets to the finals of Roland Garros, and we say, oh, wait for grass. And then grass wasn't particularly successful, but now she's back. She reached the finals in Cincinnati, gets to week 2 here, and you sort of look at her game and you sort of say, why can't this player win majors again? As good an athlete as you will find. And then Vondrousova, I think, is a nice story too, that I mean, nobody benefits when a player wins a major and everyone sort of writes it off as a fluke and they disappear. So for Vondrousova to come back at the very next major and reach the second week, I think is a really good sign. Yeah,
with Ons Jabeur on the flip side, losing that major and the pressure that she felt and still just kind of gutting it through, hasn't been near her best, still winning. You see both sides of duality of what happens when you win versus you lose a major, how tough it could be. And before I forget too, Sabalenka #1 in the world now. It's a pretty big moment for her. We'll see what that means the rest of this tournament and beyond, but she finally tracked Iga down after chasing her all year.
Yeah, it came a little strangely. I did not think she probably didn't envision Ostapenko will take out an Iga. But I mean, now we'll see what will it mean for Sabalenka to take the court as the #1 ranked player in the world.
Yeah, I don't know if you envision that as a kid, right? Winning #1 in your hotel room while you're eating like Uber Eats or something. Exactly. More with Jon Wertheim here on Tennis Channel Inside In. The men's side of things is very fascinating as well. I mean, starting with the #1 in the world who just overtook the ranking, Novak Djokovic. He had the test early, a 2-set comeback against his countryman, Laslo Djere, and then he follows it up with the win over Gojo. He's back into the quarterfinals, and really, I looked at that best-of-5 match, the 2 sets that he lost, John, and it's funny because down 2 sets, but I can't find one person that thought he was actually going to lose that match.
Yeah, and I think we've sort of seen this movie enough times that I think this was his, in the last 30 months or so, I think this was his 5th time he has come back from a 11-2 deficit. Remember Musetti in the French Open final, and Sinner Sinner at Wimbledon. And I think this is just part of this is the benefits of best of 5 versus best of 3.
Yeah.
This is best of 3. Novak's at home, and we're all talking about whether at 36 he's peaked and it's a disappointment. And instead it was sluggish for an hour, and then he turned it on. And I do think, too, he has not played a day match yet. Taylor Fritz presumably will be during the day.
Yeah.
So in terms of his scheduling, in terms of sort of the rhythm and buzz of the tournament, it's been a little strange. But once again, Novak into week 2.
Well, people are going to look at the paths there, and obviously Alcaraz was the 1 seed and has just been taking care of business as well. And, by all accounts, the easiest of the 4th-round matchups, but then it really ramps up. You'd have to go Sinner, Medvedev. And you look at Djokovic's side, Fritz will be the 1st seed he faces. There's the American test there, but you can't really predict how the draws are going to break down. Djokovic is going to, and Alcaraz are going to be favorites against anyone, but I do think for Djokovic, how he manages his body, and obviously that comes with the diet, he is built for best of 5, and we're seeing it with Alcaraz too, but nobody has had this level of sustainability in the 5-set format.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes we just forget how big a factor best of 5 is. I don't think it's necessarily easy to go from day to night back to, or from night to day and possibly back. And we all know that Novak's staying in New Jersey, a 45-minute commute. So I think there's some rhythm issues.
Yeah.
But, I think a lot of times we say this just because it's intuitive and common sense that quarterfinals and semifinals are going to be important and take care of business. But I would like to see data on that because, Alcaraz last year is a great example.
Court time, didn't really prove that one true. Yeah.
Playing till 3 in the morning and five-set matches and American crowds, and he was still the last man standing.
Yeah, and I think the U.S. Open on the men's side is in such a great situation because obviously I'm kind of seeing people, fans and media, bill Alcaraz, Djokovic, almost like combat sports. Like we want that next edition.
Yeah, exactly.
We want the rematch. But if it doesn't happen, it could be an American. It could be a guy like Sinner or former champ like Medvedev. Not the worst thing. I don't think there's like a floor that's really bad for how this plays out.
Yeah, and I think that's something we often forget about. What's tennis going to look like after the big 3?
Yeah.
You know what? There'll be storylines, and whether it's Medvedev winning his 2nd U.S. Open in 3 years, or whether it's the rise of the Americans, there'll always be a story.
Alcaraz's popularity, though, is very fascinating already because, like, that Tiafoe match last year, it wasn't like it was a fully partisan crowd.
Yeah, exactly.
Alcaraz is a global superstar already.
Right. And people are already saying, when he plays Djokovic, he's going to be the fan favorite. And you sort of want to say, well, why exactly? Alcaraz is great. We all love him, the shot making and the showmanship, but there's still a bit of a language barrier, and we haven't really gotten to know him the way we have with other players. I think that's a good observation, and I think, sometimes less is more, right?
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I also think the U.S. Open crowd, which by and large I'm a fan of them, especially the post 1 a.m. crowd when it's just the diehards there.
Right.
And this is tennis fans in general, a lot of times at majors, they're just rooting for more tennis too. So I do feel like some of the rooting for the underdogs against Djokovic haven't necessarily been personal.
Exactly.
They just don't want to see 3 quick sets and then have nothing to do.
Yeah, right. I want to get my money's worth here.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, before we get to the Americans, I had to bring up Daniil Medvedev because this guy's just the best soundbite in tennis, right? Like there's nobody close to him right now. His reactions all tournament, and we're talking movies, and I threw a basketball movie up, but I go back to another classic, the original, not the new Hulu one, the White Men Can't Jump movie, and I look at Medvedev as a guy who I do think plays better when he's that agitated state. Like it gets him,
Billy Coyle.
Yeah, it gets him to a place that he needs to be, and I think a lot of it is manufactured, and I do think the New York crowd's starting to just enjoy the show of it more, not take it as personal.
And I think they recognize that this is not, this is a truth teller. This is a guy who deep down is a good guy, and this is not a villain, but he's great. I mean, I don't know if you saw, who was it against Chris O'Connell? He lost a set, and he called for the trainer and said, "What's the problem?" He said, "I lost the set." He's good entertainment value, and I think on Armstrong in particular, where the crowds are close and it's a little bit softer light than Ash, he's really been able to shine. But his tennis has been great too.
Yeah, our own Mark Petchy brought this up in terms of Medvedev and also threw Zverev in there. He did say that the conditions favor guys like this. Not that they're going to win, but it gives them a better chance how the game and how the ball, obviously the ball is too a big topic, but how it's playing. Not to bring up old wounds. I know last year on this show you picked Medvedev to win. It didn't happen for him. He ran into Kyrgios. Oh, man. But do you think that Medvedev is a legit contender to win? Obviously, Djokovic, Alcaraz deserve to be favorites, but can Medvedev actually win this tournament?
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's done it before, and by his own reckoning, he's a hard court specialist.
Yeah.
Interesting characterization. I mean, I just think there's a big staircase down from Alcaraz and Novak. So Medvedev would probably be your third pick, but I just think he's taken a fair amount of damage. Dimonor earlier this summer on the hard court. I mean, he's taken some wounds, and obviously hasn't won a second major. He would be my third pick, but right now I think they're two guys that are just at a different plane.
Yeah, and it's fascinating too because you have the Sinner Alcaraz rematch one match away in the quarters, and I'd say, well, how would I handicap this if that match is a war and Medvedev breezes? But then that doesn't seem to work on Alcaraz, right? He could just play five sets and work on. That Sinner match though would be fun. I mean, if we get that again, and I do think Jannik's looked a little more focused recently. But it's going to be a step up if he gets there to play Alcaraz yet again. A better Alcaraz than last year, too.
I mean, we said the same thing about Djokovic at Wimbledon when they got a rematch and they had a great five-setter. And what's it going to look like when they have this rematch? And Sinner didn't
It's really because these guys are getting better, too. Like, we're always looking at it like, well, Sinner's improved, but it's not like they're staying still.
Exactly. It's like AI. Alcaraz is only getting better and learning from mistakes. And I also just think Sinner, I'm not yet convinced he has that, like, I'll chew on barbed wire if I have to, but I'm not leaving this court as anything but the winner. I'd like to see a little more toughness from him.
My issue with Sinner is he's had a lot of those letdown matches where he has gotten by Alcaraz. If it's a conditioning, if it's a next matchup, but Medvedev ran through him in Miami after the Alcaraz match. So I think to go through this draw might be tough for him. But the American men are coming in bunches. I didn't realize. So 3 American quarterfinalists, Fritz, Tiafoe, Ben Shelton. They put up the graphic. It had been Roddick, Agassi, Blake. I think Ginepri was in there. Right. So shout out to Ginepri for being one of the last ones there. But 3 Americans in the final 8. I know we talk about world beaters and this Roddick 20-year streak of winning a major, but 3 out of 8 is pretty darn impressive.
The global population is what? Is 12 billion in the U.S. So I think sort of proportional to population, the U.S. is doing awfully well. I mean, I think the question is just going to be like, us tennis nerds, we get it. We understand that 3 of the last 8 is great. And remember, Francis was a semifinalist last year. Tommy Paul was a semifinalist in Australia. Taylor Fritz was in Wimbledon, quarterfinalist in Wimbledon 2022. I mean, we've had some results, but I just think to the casual sports fan, the outside, they're used to Connors and McEnroe and then Pete and Andre and Jim. And until an American lifts that trophy, like 3 of 8's not going to cut it with the people I run into on the street.
It's unfortunate, too, because, even if there's a finalist, she'll say, well, we haven't won that trophy.
Exactly.
So Tiafoe getting back here, starting with him is pretty impressive. I mean, I know the draw, and you could say the same for Fritz, has opened up, but there is that expectation, and I would argue that younger Francis, when he had that Aussie run, ran into Nadal, got dealt with pretty swiftly. Right. He had a hard time, as any young person probably would, handling that newfound success and ranking. He's a professional now in every sense of the word.
Yeah, and I love how he's very open. I build my season to peak for the U.S. Open, so he puts a lot of pressure on himself. He and Taylor Fritz both have had great draws, fine, but what's the cliche? You can only beat who they play and put in front of you, and now he's suddenly both of them. They're they're single-digit sets away from winning the title.
With Fritz, you look at obviously Djokovic coming up, but he had never had this before. So I looked at those first matches, first 2, regardless of who he played, as the real test. Like, can you just get through the first 2 rounds and try to build something? Because it hadn't happened before. But, the game's there, and, it's genetic. Kathy May, 1978 quarterfinalist, so following in his mom's footsteps is also pretty cool. But he's someone that has been carrying the mantle as the number 1 ranked player for a few years now. So I guess I'm not super surprised given what Fritz's game has looked like that he's here.
Yeah, I think he had lost 4 of his last 8 matches at majors coming in. Last year, lost to Tracy Sun, to Brandon Holt, who was a qualifier. So just getting to week 2 is an achievement for him. Look, he's played a teenager, he's played a qualifier, he played Stevie Johnson. He hasn't had the toughest road, but that also means he doesn't have much, still a lot of tread on the tire. And now we'll see about Novak. I mean, I think a day match helps Taylor. I think the fact that Taylor hasn't really been tested, hasn't dropped a set.
Yeah, that's correct.
So we'll see. I mean, if they both play their best, Novak's going to win. But if Taylor makes life difficult and the crowd gets involved and it's hot, this could be interesting.
They played close sets. Unfortunately for Taylor, Djokovic has won a lot of them, but there have been a lot of tie breaks, a lot of 7-5 sets in there. Ben Shelton's the next one, and this has been a moment, a breakthrough for him. Fascinating that he bookends his major year with success, quarterfinal at Aussie, quarterfinal at best or more at U.S. Open. We'll see, but 7-18 in the middle, so he weathered the storms.
Weird year where you get to week 2 of a major, the first major outside the United States you've played, and you're the toast of tennis, and then you go about 8 months without stringing together back-to-back wins, and I think people were pretty openly sort of like, how good is this kid? And did we go overboard on the hype? And then you come to the U.S. Open and beat Tommy Paul in 4 sets, serve 149 miles an hour, and suddenly you're in the quarters. So
that serve, and you can say this with whether it was Isner or Milos or these guys, this era, Roddick before, Kevin Anderson. It just sounds different. Like there's just no way. And the fact that he's a lefty.
It looks different, too. It bounces at a different place on the back screen. Yeah, I think to the naked eye, you see that lefty serve and sort of say, whoa, that's a weapon.
I'll give media technology some credit and where we've gone. I know a lot of people ripping them in certain ways, but that camera angle behind the baseline of him serving is pretty insane to see what it looks like and what it would look like on the other side defending it.
With action, too. You can pick up. This isn't just a fastball down the middle.
Right.
This is moving at 149.
He's smart, too, because he'll mix up body serves. He was keeping Paul on his heels. Paul had an off day, had breakpoint chances. I think that's a lot of credit to Shelton serving his way out of that. But the hype is, like, you watch a match like that yesterday, and we'll see if he beats Tiafoe and how far this goes. But you understand why tennis nerds, especially like us, were so in on the hype, because he's got so many physical gifts that just need to be molded like a little clay here. But the game and the potential is sky high.
Lefty, 20, 149 miles an hour. He plays to the crowd. He's personable. Yeah, I don't know if you've watched any of the doubles and the mixed doubles.
Yeah, him and Taylor.
A nice set of hands. There's a lot to like here.
Yeah, and an advertisement for maybe the parents don't specialize in sports, because this was an American football player who waited a little later to go with a full tennis route. So having his dad, Brian Shelton, in his corner helps as well. So that's going to be like what our men's draw looks like. If you had to kind of forecast this, obviously we're looking at that Djokovic-Alcaraz final. Do you see, I guess the best way to ask this would be, was there going to be blips? If there were blips, who would be likely to stumble a bit?
No, it's a good question. Obviously Medvedev is sort of the third-seeded wild card. I mean, could be the most obvious disruptor. I just don't see it. I mean, I just think everything from the best-of-5 format to the fact that these two guys have won, they've split the last 5 majors.
Yeah.
I just think everything, which is good. I don't say this with any reservation. I mean, if we can if this can be the third straight major in which we get an Alcaraz-Djokovic match, I think we all win. It's
crazy that's what we're gearing for. I agree. I just don't trust anybody to beat Djokovic in that 5-set format outside of Alcaraz. And Alcaraz has, the combination, as Djokovic said, of the big 3. The Rafa quality that I've noticed is he gets that break right back. Like in these sets where he falls down, it's remarkable. Well, before we wrap up, this has been fun with Jon Wertheim on Tennis Channel Inside In. Just a couple notes. Also want to give props to some players. Don't you find it ironic that Stan Wawrinka was the old guy that kind of matched the Connors run of like 92? Just being the oldest guy to win a couple matches.
Yeah, right.
Never would have thought it would have been him, like of all the people, too.
It's funny, too, because he played center, and it was 85-15 pro Stan. I mean, he really, for whatever, yes, he won this event, but it was 7 years ago, and I don't know if it's sort of the Roger carryover, or he's a good social media guy, or just people love the backhand. He's really become a fan favorite, too, and at age 38, realistically, is he going to win another major? Probably not, but he still could make life very interesting.
Yeah, I think the fans, especially in New York, love giving their flowers to the vets, and Stan has, weathered the storm. It's great to see. And also want to give props to John Isner, his retirement as well, loses to Michael Mmoh in 5 sets, but held that mantle for American tennis, and I know it wasn't as high as even it is right now, but, it's the same thing with like James Blake, who was a mentor to him, and these players that, do their best, carry the mantle. It's not their fault the contemporaries aren't there. I also think Isner was generally appreciative of that next generation taking it a little further.
Yeah, I think it's just sort of a consummate pro, and I think he gave his respect to superior players. I think he knew what his strengths and weaknesses were. he made life really difficult for a lot of players. I mean, there's no way you can simulate. You can't tell your practice partner, hey, go be a 6'9" guy that serves like that. But I also think you're right. His willingness to mentor and I think he's happy at the state in which he's leaving American men's tennis. He'll be missed.
That serve would have been great if he wasn't 6'9", but the fact that he is 6'9", it just makes it unfair. Well, I had to give an update too and check. Peyton Stearns is up 4-1 as we record this in the first set on Vondrousova. So could be another Midwesterner into the quarterfinals there. This has been good. Want to wrap with, unfortunately, you're the news guy, so I get the serious stuff. Where are we at with the WTA finals? Because I know it's not great and it's a tough one, and I know we can only
the fact that we're talking about this and it's the first week of September and we're it's 8 weeks away is problematic. My reporting said Saudi Arabia was at the 1 yard line when the tournament started. The WTA helped to they'd hoped to make a quiet announcement. That obviously they got some pushback, and now it looks as though there are some other alternatives. This may just mean, listen, we need a year to pause. We need a year to reset, to get some clarity on the site and everything. I mean, I had people saying, look, we don't even know if our players will be able to wear their regular attire. Like, we just need to know more before we make this big move. So this may just be a year delay, but it doesn't sound like it's headed to Saudi Arabia in 2023.
Yeah, it's and not to get into the weeds of how this decision should go, but it is a huge decision with very little time, and I think that's the biggest thing that stands out. Czech Republic looks like a great place. Obviously, the tennis passion influence there. They had the issue with getting Russian and Belarusian players in, but it sounds like there be an exemption if the finals were to take place there.
Yeah, I mean, it's unclear. The way it was explained to me, it does sound like there'll be an exemption or that policy will end. I don't know if that's going to apply for coaches and entourage, but certainly the players. I mean, the flip side to that whole argument is Russia did something really bad right next door. So this isn't some inherent bias some people said, well, how can we say no to Saudi Arabia and then go to the Czech Republic where they don't allow Russian athletes in? And the response is, A, they are, but B, this isn't codified bias. This is in response to an act of hostility a few hundred miles away.
Well, I would just hope that they get a finals, and, it's an obviously opportunity. It's a big payday that these players deserve, and, given what's happened in the last couple of years, we just like to see the schedule kind of along and good there. Last thing, Jon Wertheim did have to comment you on that piece on Ryan Day at Ohio State. Not just as an Ohio guy, but any crossover we can get, I think it's a good thing. And the forehand looked a little good. The movement was okay, but I think the fact that these coaches, anybody that plays tennis, it's a great thing to see. But he works so many hours that I feel like this is as much a mental break as it is just a physical exercise.
Yeah, exactly. But also, this is not someone who just, I pick up a racket every now and then. I mean, he's serious about his tennis. I think it helped him in terms of I think he likes the sports psychology. I think the individual versus team. And Ty Tucker, who is the Ohio State men's coach, one of the all-time great American junior tennis legends, I think he plays a big supporting role in this.
Yeah, still has his name on the court at Ohio State, and he's coaching. So he's got the Coach K treatment there. Well, this has been a blast. Thanks a ton for coming on the show. We've had the crossover support in the U.S. Open. Saw Aaron Rodgers in the TC hat the other day, too. So this Open will be exciting. But Jon Wertheim, thanks for coming on Tennis Channel Insight, and always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Anytime.